But as this crisis continues and deepens, it is very, very likely that those type of outbreaks will occur here in the United States. So oil equals food. Actually, corn equals oil. As a species, we've figured out how to take fossil fuels and can make them edible somehow. And we are utterly dependent. All of our conventional agriculture is utterly dependent. How many of you ever taken a drive out through, say, West Texas or Idaho or Nebraska, some of those really big food-producing states, and you just drive for miles and miles with rows and rows and rows of crops? And that's only possible because of the huge combines they have for everything from tilling the earth to planting the seeds to harvesting to cultivating, the whole process. And then, of course, once they've harvested it, then the processing it and all the transportation and even the packaging is often made from oil. The fertilizers are often derivatives of natural gas, the nitrates they use to fertilize the plants, every step of it. And about 65% of the oil that we use here in the United States is imported. So as the price of oil goes up, just like that chart we were talking about, the price of food is going up. Now the third big factor, so we talked about weather, the price of oil, and the third big factor is your local government. Look at those guys. Looks like a theater. It is a theater, isn't it? You know. Some 30 countries around the world have export bans on food production because they've been having problems with their crops, and they're saying we've got to feed our own people. You can expect to see a lot more of that protectionism going forward in time as we have more difficulty growing food with erratic weather and increasing price of oil. Another type of thing is, like, who knows about the Senate Bill 510, which recently passed? Yeah, a lot of you are aware of that, where it's food safety, and I agree with them. The commercial food supply is so large scale that there's huge problems with it, and but the net result of that is going to be a whole lot more bureaucracy and testing, and basically it's going to cause an increase in prices, just because whenever you get the government involved with anything, it's going to cost you more money. Another thing that you'll start seeing more of, and we're already seeing around the world, is in China they're doing some things. They're trying to do price fixing, rationing, controls. And that's, even as short ago as the 1970s, we were doing that here in the United States. Of course, we did it in World War I and World War II also. So, governments have a long and rich history of trying to interfere. The fourth thing I didn't mention in this slide is the speculators. The guys, traders and stuff like that. They're going to really make those prices swing wildly. And you'll see in the news, they'll talk in the news, and they're going to blame the high prices on the speculators at one point in time to divert your attention from the fact that we just don't have the supply and we've got a huge demand. So that's another point to look forward to in 2011. So it doesn't look good. And I sincerely believe your grocery bill is going to double in 2011, and I think when you see these factors, you'll agree with me. In fact, I only hope it doubles. There's potential for it to go a lot higher. So to recap real quickly, our reserves are almost down to nothing. The global food prices have already been increasing pretty dramatically. This is going to continue and probably only accelerate the rate at which food prices increase. Extreme weather is causing problems with production all over the world. The extreme weather does not seem to be calming down. It looks like it's only getting more volatile. And oil prices, let's see, who was it? A former CEO of Shell just recently announced that we should all expect $5 a gallon gas. And that's pretty indicative that oil prices are going to be going up. So food prices are definitely moving up. So that's the bad news. Americans, for generations, we have just not ever had to think about food. We really haven't. And the thought of hunger, starvation, or famine has never been on our plates. We don't even have it in living memory for any kind of problems. But we are up against a crisis right now that is so big, and something none of us in our collective memory have any experience with, and this is dramatic, and we absolutely need to work on it right away, and that's why I'm here talking, and I implore you to go out, and we're going to start talking on solution as our next slide. So what can you do about it? Well, the most obvious thing is go out and buy a bunch of stuff, you know. We're consumers, right? Let's go buy stuff, you know. An excuse to go shopping. But seriously, start stocking up on food. You know, that's the first thing, because it is going to take you a long time to learn to grow food. Learning to grow food is ultimately going to be your solution. We'll go through some real quick tips of how to start on stocking up on food and preparing. And I just have two real quick introductions to it. And the first is store things that you eat. You know, nobody wants to suddenly start eating beans and rice if you've never eaten them before and you're used to eating hot dogs and caviar or whatever else, you know, other things, or beer and pretzels, and then all of a sudden somebody starts making you eat wheat bread, you know. So store what you eat, you know. So, and I wish I'd have put on here a whole big thing of coffee. I was talking to a group recently, and the thought of not having coffee in the morning put everybody into a panic. And an interesting thing, in Algeria, the riots that they're having there now, you know what the people are yelling for? So they're doing the normal rioting thing, they're turning over cars and burning this and that and the other and fighting with the police, but they're running around, you know what they're saying? They're saying, we want sugar. I was like, wow, you know, we want sugar. Sugar is such a powerful drug. Almost all of us are addicted to it. You know, stock up on sugar. So beans and whole grains by far have the highest caloric content and the best nutrition and have the longest shelf life. So those by far are your basics. You know, everybody says, I'm going to get me some beans and rice as my backup stuff. Actually, rice is not such a good one. Brown rice goes rancid. It has a lot of oils and it goes rancid in about 6 months to a year is my experience. Maybe if you pack it better than I did, it might get a little bit longer, but that's not really a long time length. And white rice is basically just, you know, devoid of all nutrition. I mean, it's really just empty calories. Now, if that's all you got or that's all you can afford, by God, you know, go get it. Don't let me discourage you from that. But, you know, notice that other things might be available, such as wheat or barley or oats, are better items to store. And they can have 25, 30-year shelf life if they've been stored properly. And they're good foods. And if you don't know how to eat those foods right now, well, that's part of it. You know, start learning how to soak your beans and how to grind your wheat and those kind of things, and start incorporating that into your diet now. Two other great resources, and there's a ton of stuff out on the web on how to start building up a stockpile of food. And two of the resources that I use a lot are survivalblog.com. Those guys have tons and tons of articles. And also the Survival Podcast is run by Jack Spirko. And they have these archives, and they have just tons and tons of information. And I highly recommend both those guys. There's also, when you start getting into thinking about what happens when your food supplies get tight, then we're going to start having increased violence. We're going to start having, you know, medical problems, and there's going to be situations where life in general is going to get very tough. And both of those websites do a good job of addressing all the aspects of preparing. You know, my major thing is I've been learning to work how to grow food, and that's what I can present to you here. But I want to offer you those two resources, and it's all free. It really is. These guys have a tremendous resource for people. There's also a plethora of other websites coming out. You know, Stumbling Homestead and Self-Reliant Sufficient, and a lot of it. There's a lot out on the web. Take advantage of it. You know, use the stuff while the web is still available, which is a whole other conversation. So learn to grow food. And you know, even if the end of the world as we know it weren't coming, it's a whole lot healthier. I tell people, you know, if you don't like vegetables, it's probably because you've never eaten them. You know, if you've been eating stuff from the grocery store and the restaurants, you have never really eaten vegetables. And of course, it's more economical. It's basically your time, for the most part. And if you're unemployed, then it's free. And food security, you know, that's what this whole talk is all about, is how do you start taking care of your own food security. For me, I started out in panic. I totally freaked out, because not only could we see that our whole real estate business was going to collapse, but we also foresaw that eventually we would undergo societal collapse. And you don't sleep well with that kind of thing going on in your mind. So one of the very surprising things as a result of learning to grow food is the deep fulfillment and the deep healing that comes from actually, instead of being dependent on some semi-truck network of things, you know, just going into your backyard and there's your meat and there's your vegetables, and then in your pantry is some canned stuff you had from last summer. There is, and I've had just an incredible spiritual development through this whole process, and would love sometime to come back and talk about that. Also, it's a depression-proof activity. I mean, let's face it, we're in some real troubled times. Texas has been blessed with our economy is not nearly as bad as a lot of other places, but you know, if you get good at growing food, it not only are you going to eat, but you can possibly make a living from it. Actually, the demand for organic and local food has gotten to where there's enough of a premium. Small farmers can make a living doing it now, even with an acre or two, which is a lot for an organic farm, for a family to farm. You can totally make a living from it now, which was not true that long ago. So we're going to talk about family self-reliance. So we're talking about growing half or 3/4 or maybe even 100% of the food that you need to eat. By the way, this is my daughter here, and if you ever can get your children to work, I highly recommend taking a picture. And then if you can ever get in front of a group of people and brag about it, do it, you know, go for it. And we're also talking about doing this under the scenario where the stores are closed or they're so expensive you can't afford it. So how do you do this with almost nothing? You know, of course, if you do have more resources and you can go out and buy a bunch of soil, or you can go out and buy this stuff, you know, do that. It's going to give you a leg up. But I'm talking about the situation where that's, I want to work in the worst case scenarios, where my come from is. Also, I want to point out that homesteading is different from commercial production, and obviously from the conventional production, it's very different because you're not going to be on big tractors. But even organic production, shifting to a commercial mindset and scale requires different mindset, different equipment, different techniques. Not to say that it's not valuable to go visit your local organic farms and learn things, but just bear in mind as you begin on this journey, there's a lot of things that you can do in your backyard that they can't do. And there's a lot of, actually much more interesting and productive techniques that you can use because you're working on a smaller, more intimate scale. The other thing is community is vital, and that's part of why I'm here. You just have to have other people doing it also. I'll give you one example. So I grow on my farm, we have rabbits, we have vegetables, we have some fruit trees, small miniature dairy cattle, you know, a few other miscellaneous things. And that would be the extent of my diet. I have one neighbor who is also really into this, and he has goats and bees, and of course the chickens and vegetables and stuff. And we trade. And from that one neighbor, I now have goat meat, I have goat milk and goat cheese, and I have honey. And he has rabbit meat, some of the fruits that he doesn't produce, and beef. We have this great, so my standard of living, my whole, my culinary expansion has increased dramatically just by having one person. And the more people that you have involved in it, you know, the more healthy and vibrant your community can be. Other simple things such as seed saving. There's, you know, some plants that have to be separated by 1/4 of a mile or something. They're going to cross-pollinate. So having a couple of neighbors, and you know, you grow these this year and I'll grow those this year, and we'll swap seeds later. It just enhances, it makes you more resilient and enhances what you can do. So community is vital. Well, let's get started with some more of the nuts and bolts. And I often talk about people about types of water, and most of you say, what kind of type of water do you have? And they usually tell me either bottled or tap. So what we're going to talk about from food production, and there's four types, and we got rainwater, which is absolutely John Drumgold, who does the Saturday and Sunday morning gardening talk show. How many of y'all have listened in on that? It's a great resource too. Too many commercials, but John's been on the air for years and offers great advice. And he calls rainwater the gold standard, and he's absolutely right. When you get a good rain, your garden will just flourish. It's just amazing how those plants respond to rainwater.